Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY refitting good old Athena video. If you're new to my channel, this lovely looking boat here behind me is Athena. She's a 1987 Warrior 38 that I'm in the middle of refitting. The end goal is for my fiancée Ava and I to be able to move aboard in roughly a year and a half and then start cruising. Over the last couple of months I've been working on and off on Athena's new rudder. The rudder that's going to sit right here. Finishing Athena's new rudder is an important milestone I need to reach before I can hopefully put her back in the water later this year. Last weekend I was almost certain I was going to be able to pour the foam into Athena's new rudder. That didn't quite work out, but I am very hopeful for this weekend, so why don't we head up to the workshop. We're almost ready to start pouring the foam. I've got the rudder here suspended over a heating mat that's going to help post-cure the foam, and I've got half of a water bottle wedged into the trailing edge of the rudder. All of the sides of the rudder are glassed with the exception of the trailing edge up here, and that's why we can split it open, and then hopefully there won't be any leaks where the foam just goes pouring out. This is the foaming epoxy I'm going to be using inside of the rudder. It is from a company called Sailboat, I think. The product is called PB250. It's called 250 because this stuff has a density of 250 kilograms per cubic meter. For those of you in the US, this would be the rough equivalent of 16 pounds per cubic foot. In the last video, I filled one of the rudder shells with sand. I then measured that sand to have a volume of 16.4 liters. Times that by 2, it's 32.8 liters of volume for the entire rudder. The foaming epoxy has an expansion rate of 4, so divide the 38.2 by 4, that's 8.2. The instruction says to add 10% for waste, so that brings us to roughly 9 kilograms of the foaming epoxy. Let's go ahead and get some foaming epoxy mixed up. Now that stuff is nothing like polyurethane foam. Once it starts expanding, it's very gentle, but the mixing process is a little bit hectic because you only have 4 minutes. And just like that, it is about 3 hours later. As you saw in the time lapse, there was a fair bit of overflow of the expanding foam, but that's fine. That just means there are no voids inside of the rudder. And this stuff is super easy to clean up, so yeah, this is perfect. As far as the reason for all of this overflow, well, I didn't take the volume of the rudder stock into consideration, but that was on purpose. I just wanted to make sure that I was absolutely certain that I had enough foam in there. Having voids in there would be no good, and having to deal with those afterwards would be more work. So I'd rather just waste a little bit of foam and be sure that there are no voids. When you saw us pour in the foaming epoxy, we did so through a little strainer. That is a tip that's recommended by the manufacturer just to remove any little bit of air you might have mixed in there when mixing the resin and the hardener. And speaking of mixing the epoxy, we did that using one of these doohickeys here because you don't have unlimited mixing time here, so we wanted to be fairly quick about it. The next step is for the rudder just to sit here for between 6 to 24 hours at room temperature. After that, it's going to get 6 hours at 40 degrees Celsius, and then it'll be done. Or that is to say, the foaming part is done. I still have to apply glass to the trailing edge here, do a little bit of fairing, but we'll get to that. For now, I am going to place my little heating box over the rudder because the temperature is going to drop down pretty low tonight, and I want to make sure this stays at room temperature. To keep the rudder nice and toasty, I'm going to be using my little silicone heating mat and the temperature controller. So let's go ahead and get that hooked up. I've secured the little temperature controller, so now we should just be able to get the box placed on top of this and turn on the heat. Then it's just a matter of setting this guy for, let's say, 21 degrees Celsius. There we go. I think this box is going to do a great job of keeping the rudder nice and toasty. And then tomorrow, before heading to work, I can swing by the workshop and crank the temperature up to 40 degrees Celsius. It's a couple of days later. Now, who is excited to see what's hiding inside of the box? Fair warning, I've cheated a little bit. Ta-da! The foam is fully expanded, post-cured, and I've also glassed the trailing edge. That means the new rudder is now officially waterproof. That is a pretty cool milestone. And more importantly, it feels rock solid. The post-curing was pretty undramatic, but there was some additional expansion when post-curing the foam, and the foam did seem to exert a little bit more pressure at that point in time. So if you're going to do this, I would be semi-precise with the amount of foam you actually pour in there. Earlier in the video, you might have noticed this little hump down here. This is a temperature and humidity logger. I use this to keep track of how much heat I've applied to the rudder, but seeing as I'm done post-curing it, I no longer need this. Seeing as I'm done applying heat, I can go ahead and get rid of my silicone heating mat and the temperature controller. With the way I've got the rudder suspended off of the workbench here, I can actually go ahead and rotate it. That should make the next step in the process a lot easier. The little bit of fully cured foam that's left here is best removed with Mr. Angle Grinder. As you saw, any cured, overflown foam doesn't remove itself by magic, but with an angle grinder, it's not that bad. The next step is to sand all of the edges so I can lay up a little bit more glass to strengthen the joint between the two halves. I don't know if that's actually necessary, but now is certainly the time to do that when I've got the rudder all exposed. And there's also a little whoopsie-daisy I need to fix up here. I must have missed this little bubble here, but that's easy to fix. After that little bit of oh glorious sanding, the rudder is now fully prepped for the glass that's going to go over these seams to strengthen them, and also just a lick of fairing compound. But the fairing compound we're going to come back to tomorrow. For now, let's just get some glass on this. I've got this 450 gram BX, which should be more than adequate. This is all the glass I need, so now it's just a matter of mixing up some of West Systems 105, and in this case, their slow hardener. This is gonna take a while, so let's cue a time lapse. It is a day later. Yesterday, when I was done laying up glass, I put my little heating box on the rudder again, just to give it a nice boost of heat to make sure that I could go ahead and sand those areas today. That little boost of extra heat is probably not necessary, but I would love to be able to get fairing compound on this and start applying primer this weekend. That means I am on a little bit of a tight schedule. With the peel ply I applied yesterday, I will only have to do a bare minimum of sanding. In fact, all I'll have to do is just to knock down any bit of stray laminate like this stuff here, any pokey bits, and any shiny areas. Thanks to the peel ply, all of the larger surfaces are basically ready for primer. A little bit of sanding later, and the rudder is now ready for fairing compound. Now is one of those times in life where you have to make a decision. I can either take the easy way or the slightly spiffier way. If I apply fairing compound to the rudder, well then I'm also forced to apply primer, because the primer is what's going to protect the fairing compound from the water. So if I skip the fairing compound, then I could jump right ahead to the cover coat. Even though I faired the old rudder prior to making the molds, where I've laid up glass along the edges here, there is a little bit of unevenness. Seeing as I've already got God knows how many hours into this rudder, it just seems wrong to take the easy way out now. And if I don't get the profile of the rudder just right, then I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to get Athena up on a plane. All joking aside, for fairing, I'm gonna bust out the good old 407. I'm gonna go ahead and slap the official, hopefully that is good enough seal on the rudder. Now for some cleanup, which is that simple. It's just some paper towel and a little bit of acetone. It is the next morning. Late last night, I swung by the workshop and I put the little heating box over the rudder in the hopes that I'd be able to get started sanding this morning. Well, this looks pretty decent. I know my dog Yukul doesn't seem too excited about the prospect of spending a few hours sanding, but I'm sure he's just playing hard to get. When it comes to choice of sanding apparatus, you guys are going to see me switch between 3 different doohickeys. I've got a manual sanding board, I've got a mechanized version, and I've got my Bosch 150 Turbo. To be completely honest, the only reason I'm using these 2 for the rudder is because I'm running woefully low on sanding nets for my 150 Turbo. If this was a very large and high gloss surface, sure, I would go ahead and use these guys. But for something like the rudder, well, to be honest, I don't think the fish cares. And there we go, a not too shabby looking rudder. There's, however, something I want to fix before applying primer. As you can see by the dark color here, there is a little bit of a low spot along the trailing edge where I laid up the glass to join the 2 halves. This in no way matters in regards to performance because Athena is definitely not a racing boat, but it would be nice to fix this. I'm going to scuff up these areas so that the new fairing compound has something to stick to. And while I remember where the low spots are, I'm just gonna draw a big circle around them. I've gone ahead and applied fairing compound. Of course, this stuff now needs a chance to cure before I can sand it, so why don't we take a little detour? By detour, I mean a quick look at the autopsy of Mr. Angle Grinder. If you saw last weekend's video, you'll know that this is my trusty old angle grinder, or the remnants of it. It kicked the bucket last week, and in response to last weekend's video, I got a lot of comments saying I should just replace the brushes. The brushes, of course, being these 2 flabby bits here. When I took a look at the brushes, they looked fine to me, so I took the opportunity to learn a little bit more about how an electric motor works. In particular, how to fault find an armature, and it turns out this thing is right hooped. By hooped, I mean if I measure the resistance between the commutator bars, no matter if I measure next to or the 180 degrees test, there is a large variation in the resistance. There is no short between what I think is called the stacked teeth and the commutator bars, but still there's a large variation in resistance between the commutator bars. I am of course in no way an expert, but from what the internet tells me, which is a very dangerous statement, I believe this thing is trash. I'll link in the video down below with the instructions I followed to check this thing because, like I said, I am not an expert. It is a shame that I can't just replace the brushes. That would be a quick and very easy fix. But a new one of these is around $40, so it's not the end of the world. Now I want to thank all of you guys for the helpful comments that spurred me on to learn a little bit more about how an electric engine works. That was very interesting. Instead of staying here and watching fairing compound dry, which is the not too distant cousin of watching paint dry, I think Jökull and I are gonna go do some non-boat related stuff. It's about 10 hours later. Let's go ahead and get that last little bit of sanding out of the way. I like sanding hours on end as much as the next guy, but it is with great pleasure that I say, ta-da! Ready for primer. West System recommends that you seal the surface of anything that's been faired with any of their fairing fillers, like for instance 407, with epoxy prior to painting. To the best of my knowledge, that is done to protect the fairing filler from water. I could go ahead and do that. I've got plenty of epoxy here, but it would be easier for me to apply an epoxy primer instead. Like for instance the Sigma Cover 280 I've got here. Now when this stuff is applied in thick enough of a layer, it's going to protect the fairing compound just as the epoxy would. But with the epoxy primer, the application is going to be a little bit quicker, and also there's going to be less prep work before I'm ready to apply cover coat. If I went with the epoxy, I'd have to key the entire surface, and that is a little bit time consuming with epoxy because it's so hard. So yep, I am going with the epoxy primer. I'm gonna apply roughly 11 mils or 300 micrometers of this stuff. That should give me the protection I need. I've used the compressor to blow away as much of the dust as I could. Now I'm just gonna give the rudder a quick wipe down with the thinner that's used with the epoxy primer. There sure still is a lot of dust on the rudder. All of the prep work is out of the way, and I've prepared a little stick here with the 4:1 mix ratio. So let's go ahead and get some paint mixed up. Wow, I can't believe it. I mean, this thing looks awesome, and the rudder is so close to being done. I just need a bunch more coats of primer and then cover coat, and then it is done. Now, don't get me wrong, the rudder project has been a lot of fun, and I've gotten to get to play with some new techniques like mold making and vacuum infusion, for instance, but it's also been a lot of work. After I've finished applying the remaining coats of primer, the rudder does need to sit a little bit before I can apply cover coat. That's so that the solvents that I used in the paint can have a chance to vamoose. That is going to take a bit of time, but I should have plenty of time to take care of all of the coats of primer before next weekend, so that next weekend is going to be cover coat weekend. I'm still waiting for the yard to finish moving around boats. It is spring and everybody wants to get their boat in the water. I totally get that. But as soon as the yard is done moving around boats, I can get started on laying up glass on the structural members aboard Athena. That project remains my top priority for this summer. But until the yard is ready, it's a good thing I've got ye old faithful rudder project to keep me busy. Before ending this video, I want to take a quick second to thank all of my patrons who helped support the making of these videos, and also especially the patrons who hung out in the live stream while Cement Boat Guy and I were pouring the foam into the rudder. That was a lot of fun, and I think I might do something like that next weekend for when I'm applying the cover coat, because that is going to be a pretty drawn out process, and it would be nice to have a bit of company. A few weeks back, we got a fiber optic connection here in the workshop, and that means I can now do live streams from here without worrying about the stupid internet and the quality of the live stream, because we've got plenty of bandwidth. So yeah, there should be some more live streams coming up. If that's something you want to be a part of, head over to patreon.com/saillife and check it out. And on that note, I am going to end the video here because someone left his mask doodad aboard Athena, and there are some pretty nasty fumes from that paint. So before I get too happy loosey-goosey, I better stop the video here. So yeah, I hope to see you guys back for some glorious cover coat fun next weekend. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!